Early morning tweets. The first week of the Trump administration has been marked by a flurry of twists and turns. To help make sense of it all, the analysis of Shields and Brooks. That's Syndicated columnist Mark Shields and New York Times columnist David Brooks. And welcome to both of you. And I guess you could say, Mark, from Mexico to Russia, from oil pipelines to healthcare, it has not been a quiet first week. How's it gone?
Well, if you're a Trump supporter, it's gone terrific. He's done what he said he was going to do. He was honored his campaign commitments on the wall, on keeping the borders secure or safe or unlimited, and stopping immigration as much as possible, and building the pipeline and going ahead. I mean, so in that sense, he didn't lose any support among his supporters. Among his critics, I think, whose doubts were very much, in large part, not simply ideological, but about the temperament of Donald Trump, it's reinforced those doubts, his performance, especially the smallness of his preoccupation about the size of the crowd, which he keeps returning to in a rather bizarre fashion.
How do you see this first week, David?
It does. We were here a week ago together, and it feels like a century. And I wonder, over the course of his presidency, can he keep up this pace of news and busyness and conflict without just exhausting everybody? And I will say, among business people I've spoken to, among political class, and among Republicans on the Hill, just a great sense of being unnerved at the instability. Partly he's done what he said, as Mark said. He's undermined the post-war international order pretty quickly. Tearing down TPP was a bill that I think economists say would have produced hundreds of millions, billions of dollars of earnings every year for Americans. Picking a fight with their second biggest export market, very unnerving. I don't see the, but then I think the two other things I'd say is the general sense of chaos and incompetence in how you do it. Okay, you want to pick a fight with Mexico. Do you have to do it by tweet? Do you have to put forward a proposal that would have Americans paying for the wall and then sort of withdraw it and then sort of not withdraw it? Do it in a way maximally designed to polarize Mexican opinion against the United States? And then the final thing is, I'm left wondering, how much of this is real? Okay, he signs a series of papers that Steve Bannon and others wrote for him. But who's going to implement it? Does it make any sense? We saw that with the Syrian ban in the discussion early in the program. Right. How much of it is the government just going to let him sign papers, and then it just goes along their merry way?
And I want to ask you both about that, but I think, Mark, coming back to something you said, well, both of you have referred to this, should everyone who voted for him and who watched him for months have really expected what we've seen this week? It's the full Donald Trump coming forward, isn't it?
No question. I mean, we've talked about the disenchantment, alienation of American voters, because voters, Republicans, how long have Republicans promised a balanced budget? How long have Republicans pretended they cared deeply about budget deficits? Or Democrats on their issues about the poor. About really doing something about those in poverty and income equality. And then they get elected and, oh, you can't do it, you can't do it. I mean, whatever else. I mean, he has certainly been against the grain on that. But I don't think the temperamental, the divide on this week, Judy, I think, is those who look at Donald Trump and see somebody who goes to the CIA,
last Saturday,
and lashes out at the press and complains about the coverage of the size. I mean, here he is before the wall of heroes, sends out his press secretary for his debut looking like a hostage tape, complaining about about press coverage and this, insisting this is the biggest crowd ever. Nobody has ever measured crowds, except Barack Obama, because it was a historic turnout. But the biggest crowd before that was Lyndon Johnson. Nobody knows that. Donald Trump all of a sudden is preoccupied by it. And there's one thing that happened this week, I think, that if I were in the White House, I'd be deeply concerned about. And that was the Dallas Stars hockey team, a National Hockey League team, plays in the American Airlines Center in Dallas. It has a capacity crowd of 18,562. They had a capacity crowd last Saturday night, right after Spicer, right after the CIA. And they put up on their Jumbotron, in the big screen, attendance, 1.5 million. And the whole place erupted in laughter. And that's, I mean, when you become a punchline 30 hours into your presidency in Dallas among hockey fans, That portends a problem.
Does he, I mean, run a real danger, David, of that happening? Or are people saying, okay, let's give him, I mean, it's only the first week. Let's see what happens.
No, people are in more panic mode than before. He's just picked fight after fight. This was an example. And there's sort of two theories of he tells things that are false all the time. Is it because he's sort of an Orwellian figure, an authoritarian figure who's twisting words in an Orwellian manner, 1984, to exercise power and control people's minds? Or is he a 5-year-old who has ego needs that need to be fed, and the universe has to warp around his ego needs so he can feel good about himself, and everybody has to produce photos to make the monarch feel like he's made of gold?
Which do you vote on?
I vote on the 5-year-old kid.
King George III?
Madness of King George III. And so I think when we see that distortion, it's because he just needs the ego fed all the time. And I don't know if anybody saw after the CIA, he gave an ABC interview where he talked about the standing ovation at the CIA, the longest ever since Peyton Manning.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, the employees couldn't sit down because he didn't tell them to sit down, so they're standing. Of course, it's a standing ovation. They can't sit down. But then the way he went on and on, that was a home run, and I mean, it's weird.
Which leads, Mark, back to what I think, again, what both of you were talking about, and that's this question of facts, or whether they call them alternate facts. Are we going to continue to debate this kind of thing for the duration of the first year or the rest of his presidency?
Yes, we are, Judy. I'll tell you why. Because Steve Bannon, the president's senior counselor, chief strategist, said something this week that was absolutely true. He said that there is no opposition party. I mean, the Democrats lost 958 legislative seats during Barack Obama's 8 years. I mean, the Democrats went into the election of 2016 holding control of 7 states with the governorship in both houses of the legislature. Today, as we sit here, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Oregon, California, and Hawaii are the 5 states that have Democratic governors and Democratic legislators. It's 2,500 miles from Hartford to Sacramento, and there's not a single Democratic controlled state in between that. So the opposition really is. Marty Barron, the editor of the Washington Post, is the leader of the opposition, or David's paper, or mainstream media, because they're the ones that have to call them account. I mean, there are 214 committees and subcommittees on the Hill.
Steve Bannon called the press the opposition party, but he meant it, I think, as a political.
Well, he meant it, but I think whether he meant it or not, he spoke the truth, because he had accountability and facts are going to be maintained and insisted upon. It's only going to come that way. I mean, the Democrats on the Hill are powerless. They couldn't pass salt. I mean, if they asked for it. I mean, they couldn't. I'm sorry. They couldn't pass the sugar. I mean, that's how weak they are.
Is it that bad?
Well, I do think there's another opposition more effective right now, or more important, which is people who work in government. Some of it, the civil servants. I mean, they have to, if we're going to impose a visa on European countries, they've got to process it. And believe me, civil servants have many ways to not do something. And it's easier for them not to do it. The second is Congress. And not only the Democrats, but that's important, but also the Republicans in Congress. The Republicans in Congress, they believe in Ronald Reagan's Republican Party, not Donald Trump's Republican Party or Steve Bannon's Republican Party. Second, they've made this Faustian bargain with the guy. They think we're going to tolerate him, but we'll just as long as he signs our legislation. And if we can get some health care that we like, or tax reform that we like, all that chaos is worth it. But the chaos may turn out to be too high price to pay. And so now we get in a big fight with Mexico, and some members of Congress are very upset that we've needlessly started a trade war, which could go totally out of control. Mm-hmm. And some of them would love to go down to Mexico and say, hey, he doesn't speak for us. And they're not going to do it now because they're pausing to see what happens. But 6, 8 months, a year, they could decide this is too much for our country. We have to go down. And we would go to Mexico or whoever the next 18 fights he picks.
And David makes a point, Mark. You both talk about how much of what Donald Trump is saying is going to become reality. His own party is going to have a lot to say about how much of it becomes reality.
They are. And David is a very cheerful optimist on the subject of Republican backbone. I mean, I have seen this man has taken over the Republican Party. He's transformed the Republican Party. It is not. And Donald Trump is an independent presidential candidate who ran on the Republican label. I mean, he really did. He took it over. He transformed it into his image and his likeness. He'll toss a deferential nod once in a while. But, I mean, it's Trump's agenda. It isn't Paul Ryan's agenda. It isn't Mitch McConnell. They can stop him. I mean, as they've already stood up, McConnell has on sanctions to Russia. Right. Thank God for Jim Mattis. I mean, I don't mean to sound like a broken record, but
torture.
Now Secretary of Defense is on torture. I mean, Trump has at least deferred to him while expressing for the first time ever an American president's support, full-throated support of torture, endorsement of torture. I mean, at least Dick Cheney, the vice president, used the euphemism of enhanced interrogation for torture, which has been outlawed, which is illegal, which is immoral, which is diplomatically disastrous and militarily counterproductive and hurtful. But so I'm still waiting. I mean, thank God for John McCain, quite frankly.
But, David, what makes you think that Republicans are going to have, as Mark said, the backbone to stand up to him? Well,
A, because I hear rumblings of it. I hope rumblings lead to backbone. But second, if present is prologue, then Trump is this whirling dervish of chaos. He picked a fight with Mexico. Germany is not far behind. Somehow he'll pick a fight with them. He'll pick a fight with China, which would be truly cataclysmic. Vietnam has been severely hurt by what he did this week on TPP. So just a series of big fights just in the international arena. And as I mentioned a couple weeks ago, the president makes a lot of decisions about use of armed force. And some of those are going to go, I mean, for him to make a decision on questionable information is going to happen. He's going to have to make those decisions. And it will just feel like the whole American project, I believe, is weirdly under threat. Now, it could be that he just does this in the realm of media, and he lives up there, and Steve Bannon runs policy down here, and that would just have a Berlusconi destabilizing effect on our culture and have no practical effect. But I do think he's a fundamentally unstabilizing force, and that the people who swear to uphold the Constitution are going to have to take some measures.
But, Mark, in just a minute left, he still has the support. I mean, the polls show he still has the support of the people who voted for him. 80% of Republicans say he's doing a great job.
Judy, this is the honeymoon. I mean, this is. I mean, the troubles that he's inflicted this week and encountered were totally unforced errors upon himself. So, I mean, this really is a time. Americans want the country to do well. They want the president to do well. We just broke the 20,000 point barrier, and he stepped all over the story. I mean, if you were counseling a president and you're there when the Dow Jones breaks 20,000, you just kind of, gee, I had nothing to do with it, but I love that the American people express confidence and optimism in our future. Instead, he's doing something with David Muir, complaining about the coverage and telling everybody to watch Fox News. So, it's all he's as high now with no problems. I mean, they haven't had a crisis yet.
Yeah, this is the happiest week of the presidency. If Mr. Rogers is having a week, this should be his Mr. Rogers week, and it wasn't exactly Mr. Rogers.
I like you.
Had to get that PBS reference.
I know. I like the PBS.
And I like both of you. David Brooks, Mark Shields, thank you both.
That's Barney.